I'm going to be talking to Jonathan Arnold, who's the Senior Research Associate for Clean Growth, Canadian Climate Institute, about a new study, Net Zero Opportunities, a province by province comparison. And in this interview, we'll be talking about opportunities and risk in British Columbia. So welcome to the interview, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, look, why don't we start with an overview of your study, please?
Sure. So this study really jumps off from the Sink or Swim report that we released in the fall of last year, which was looking at the global low carbon transition and the implications that could have for Canada. Since rolling that out, we heard from governments, industry, business that they wanted more detail at the province level. And specifically on the opportunities side of the equation, I think which is often not receiving as much focus or attention. So that was the intent with the study. We took data from PitchBook to create customized lists of companies in each province, and we looked at 10 different markets where demand globally and domestically is expected to grow. And we were able to look at how many companies are active in each province, the types of investments being made, the dollar values behind those investments, to really get a sense on the transition readiness of provinces. And what we saw was that there are opportunities across the country. Some provinces are more ahead than others.
Before we get into any more questions, I want to give just a brief overview of one of the sort of your methodologies, if you will. There's three types of opportunities and risk you're talking about in your study. Demand creation sectors, so those are low carbon transition, increases demand for the product like renewable energy, electric vehicle batteries. There are carbon cost sectors. Now, those are industries that will still be competitive, but they need to decarbonize. They need to get down to zero emissions. And then thirdly, there's the demand decline sectors where you see a shrinking global demand for the product. And you use the examples of oil and gas, traditional vehicle manufacturing. See, that makes a lot of sense to me, structuring the opportunities like that, because all the three different classes of companies all require different policies, different approaches. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right. And so yeah, in that demand creation category, that's the 10 markets that I was referring to. So looking at the areas where global demand is expected to grow. So as you say, those are things like low carbon electricity, clean hydrogen, mining tech, building tech. And in those markets, their companies are active. We have about 800 companies that we recognized in Canada in our work. And yeah, those companies are at different scales of kind of where they're at in the innovation chain. So some are just starting up, and some are starting to commercialize and get real footholds in these markets. So as you say, policy needs to be tailored to reflect that, even within that demand creation category. And then, of course, it's different for the other categories as well. And we're seeing lots of examples of that in Canada. When we think of in that carbon cost sector category, emissions intensive manufacturing, BC is doing a lot of work through the Clean BC platform to help some of these companies make some very transformative investments to decarbonize their operations and become more globally competitive as the world gets more serious about climate action.
Right, and mining would be the one that would come to mind immediately in BC. A lot of mining, fossil fuel intensive. But what I've seen from the Canadian mining companies, and this would assume hold true for BC, is that there's a commitment to get to net zero and to do it reasonably rapidly.
That's right, and those are the types of investments that we're starting to see being made in provinces like BC. But also other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan as well. And as you say, companies that are making net zero commitments, and in some cases, using public funds can help accelerate that. But also other policy levers like carbon pricing certainty, regulations, that sort of thing can really provide the enabling environment to encourage those types of investments.
Now, BC has plenty of opportunities. You say that it has 175 active transition opportunity companies, the second highest in Canada after Ontario. It has a climate plan. It's got Clean BC, which I've interviewed experts about Clean BC. Everybody's pretty impressed. It's within Canada, it's seen as one of the leading climate and transition plans. but it's not perfect. There are problems. There are risks associated with it, areas that need to be improved. And one of them is the goals of Clean BC are not fully operationalized across various departments and institutions. What did you mean by that?
So what we mean is really taking that Clean BC approach and the intent behind that, and really trying to integrate it into all activities that the governments are engaged in. One example is making climate change a primary goal of a crown corporation like BC Hydro, for example, to enable them to perhaps take greater action to decarbonize and to make the grid more resilient, and enable that electrification that needs to happen in some of these opportunity areas.
Yeah, BC government's approach with BC Hydro has been criticized a fair amount recently because for not giving BC Hydro enough guidance and enough legislative directive. We saw BC Hydro's integrated resource plan, its draft plan, released a number of months ago, and it wasn't on track for the kind of doubling or tripling of electricity generation that everyone agrees will be needed by 2050. And many of the critics that I interviewed said, well, that's because they didn't get direction from their primary shareholder, which is the government.
Yeah, I mean, it starts at the top for sure. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that our mitigation team put out some research exactly on this a couple of weeks ago. So I'd encourage people to check that out. But I think there are other components here we need to recognize. You know, a big gap in BC that also needed to be bridged was the use of public funds, and sometimes those public funds were inconsistent with transition objectives. So you know, the use of public funds for oil and gas, for example, is now being re-examined, and we expect to see some pretty big changes in BC on that front to, I think, start to align the funding a little bit better and clearer with transition objectives. So that's another big thing that I've seen in the last few weeks, even that makes me optimistic.
Another point that you made in the study is that while deploying and de-risking first of their kind technologies, and there are a number of clean tech startups in British Columbia, it can lead to large public benefits, but it also, there tends to be a focus on multinationals, on big national corporations, and small to medium-sized companies sometimes get excluded.
Yeah, and so that was one of the reasons why we have a recommendation in this report where I think there's significant opportunities to pair those emerging smaller companies with those larger multinationals. Because a lot of times those multinationals will be using technologies that are available and being developed by those smaller, medium-sized companies. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to do that. We see examples elsewhere in Canada of that being done. You know, the company Carbon Cure in Halifax, for example, partnered with the Calgary Airport to help you know, bolster demand for its product that way. So I think there are lots of opportunities on that side. But as you say, I think that it can't just be a focus on large multinationals. We need to have companies that establish themselves in BC and stay in BC to really capture the benefits of the jobs and investment that take place at the local level.
So if I could sum up your study about the part of it that's about British Columbia, is British Columbia has made lots of progress. It has plenty of opportunity, but as it stands now, there are deficiencies in policy and strategy and approach by the government, the Crown's, various other institutions. And in order for BC to fully realize the benefits of the energy transition and minimize the risks, they need to take some action fairly quickly in the short term. Would that be a fair summary? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, these global markets are accelerating quickly and becoming more competitive. And the question is, just because BC is at the top of the game in Canada, does that necessarily mean it is at the top of the game globally? And that's the question that governments need to ask themselves. I think BC has done a tremendous job getting an early foothold in some of these markets, but it really is about taking it to the next level and you know, having companies that, as I say, that are grown and stay in BC that can really anchor economic growth in the transition.
Yeah, I'm a broken record on this. When you get outside of Canada, you talk, like when I interview experts in the US and Europe and Asia, the sense that you get of the pace of the global energy and actually economic transition is so much more urgent. The pace is accelerating tremendously when you look at where capital is going and things like electric vehicle manufacturing. And that kind of urgency isn't reflected at the provincial level. And even given the leadership position that the BC enjoys in Canada, I don't see the urgency in the government and even in the business leadership, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly has to be a priority for governments. We're talking about the economic future of the province, of the country, so jobs, livelihoods, and so we really do need to prioritize it. And especially when we look at the data of where the opportunities are happening in BC, 75% of these companies are based in the Lower Mainland. So there's a really big gap right now between where the jobs and opportunities are taking place within these new and growing markets and where the vulnerable sectors are in transition, which are mostly in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And so we have to also find ways on how to really bridge that divide, because otherwise you could have very inequitable outcomes in the transition. So it's about creating opportunities not just in the Lower Mainland, but throughout the province.
Well, with any luck, Premier John Horgan and his cabinet ministers will watch this interview and get a few ideas. Jonathan, thank you very much. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you.